It's the London Free Press podcast, and we are back for another episode after, let's be frank here, a very bizarre and somewhat tragic series of events in London over the last few days. And I want to catch up on one of the big events with London Free Press reporter Jonathan Juha, who joins us on the podcast to talk about the building collapse that we had here in London at the end of last week. Jonathan, thank you very much for giving us some time today and telling us what's happening with the very latest on this story. Appreciate you joining us here in the London Free Press podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I think, as you said, tragic is sort of like the best way to describe what has happened here. It's definitely something that I guess has caught a lot of people by surprise, that the impact that this is having in the community, and the tragic end that, as many of you know now, two workers who have died and 5 others who were also injured. So definitely a very tragic event.
So just give us the very basics. Most of our audience, I'm sure, knows what happened here, Jonathan, but what was the very basics as far as how this building collapse happened and when it occurred?
So it happened on Friday. The information that we have had from officials and police is that it happened around noon. This project is a 4-story apartment building called Nest on Wonderland. It's actually at 555 Tipley Terrace, just on Wonderland, sort of like between Commissioners and Springbank in West London. For what we have been able to gather from, officials and as well as some of the workers who were on site, a section on the 4th floor that had just been, freshly concrete poured on it. It just sort of like collapsed and went all the way down, trapping, unfortunately, some of the workers, again, killing 2, injuring some others. There were about 40 workers. It's sort of like an estimate of what we have, or how many workers were at the scene at the time. And then from then it was just, it has just turned into this, one of the people who died, unfortunately, his body was trapped in the structure. It became this recovery effort. The structure was not safe for anyone to actually go in and retrieve the body. So it was a very prolonged process that took place over the weekend. And it ended up on Saturday around midnight when city officials and firefighters and police and all those involved were able to retrieve the body of the second worker.
Horrifying things to listen to, and something that I think a lot of us don't think about happening from the perspective of there are things built all over the city, all over this province every single day, and something like this doesn't occur. So clearly this is a rare incident, but at the same time, very much a tragic one. I know you've done a lot of reporting and a lot of writing about the 2 men who sadly lost their lives here. What can you tell us about them?
Well, that's definitely, in every time something like this happened, the human impact or the human the face, it's certainly what touches people the most. In this case, 2 concrete workers. We managed to identify them as Henry Hodder. He was 26, lived in Tillsonburg. Unfortunately, he leaves behind a wife, 3-week-old daughter.
Oh my God.
He worked in the concrete business. He's been described by family and friends sort of like a calm guy, maybe a quiet guy, but definitely a good person, a hard worker who obviously wanted just to the best for his family and provide for his family. And the other hand, the other worker was identified as John Martins, only 21-year-old, so very young as well. He's also being described, by those who knew him as a good-natured guy, carefree, very young, who try to enjoy life. He leaves behind a girlfriend, his parents, about 10 siblings. So all in all, definitely a very difficult situation for all those involved.
Oh, it's awful to hear, and I'm sure I'm a parent of 2, and I'm sure that everyone just their heart sinks when they hear that this. One of these gentlemen is leaving behind a daughter who's 3 weeks old. That's difficult to listen to. Tell us more about what we know as to what's occurred here. I'm sure there are some investigations that are on the way. I know that there in your story, which went up on lfpress.com at the start of the week, no expense spared in probe of fatal building collapse, what the Labour Minister said. So there's some Monument Naughton quotes in there. What do we know about where this goes from here?
So it I have to be honest, I believe this is going to be a very long process. No one is willing to commit to a timeline as to when the investigation is going to be, concluding, or it's actually more than one investigation. There's the London police aspect of the investigation. There's the Ministry of Labor also have, inspectors and engineers looking into it. Office of the Chief Coroner will also have in their own investigation. And it will take time. It will take time until we can get a better sense of what actually transpired. It could be more than just one factor. There could be some human error, something that failed that was not supposed to fail. We really don't know. No one is people are being very careful, trying to not jump to conclusions as to what may have happened in this incident. And it will be a process that'll probably take time while all the three investigations take place. As you say, Monty McNaughton, the Interior Labor Minister, he says that he's committed. He said that he will move mountains until the families and friends of the people who died and were injured find the answers, that they deserve the answers. But he didn't commit to a full public inquiry. I guess that what people should know is that whenever there's a death involving, a construction site or workplace, it sort of like automatically kicks in the coroner's inquest, which is it will look at the causes of the death. It will not try to assign blame in any way. Just sort of like identify who are the persons who died, what happened, how it transpired, and how, if there's anything that can be recommended that can be followed so another death like this does not happen. But these are not mandatory recommendations. They're just that, recommendations. A public inquiry is a little bit broader in scope. It can look at more than just this side, and perhaps things as far as the way the industry does things, and they have, let's say, a little bit of more teeth into what the conclusions could be and what could come forward to, again, try to avoid a tragedy like this to happen again in the province.
Yeah, that's clearly, I think, what everyone wants to see. And I've been struck, and I don't know if you have, Jonathan, but just the outpouring I've heard in the community, and it's a strange time just because we're in the middle of this pandemic, and communicating with each other is different than it would have been a year ago at this time, or whatever it happens to be. But just people have taken this really, really hard, and it's been difficult for a lot of folks to hear these stories about what happened here and wonder, how did this occur? And then you hear about these two guys who lost their lives. It's just it's a very difficult time in London right now, as I'm sure you'd agree.
I think it's a very difficult time that comes at a very difficult year.
Right.
Obviously, as you say, it's been 9 months of this pandemic, so many deaths that we have had to report here in the community. And it's sort of like just another tragedy that comes on top of it has been for many, many people a very, very difficult year. As you say, the shows of support have been, for these families, have been big. Obviously, there have been some fundraising that has been taking place to support both families. They have, as far as I know, both exceeded sort of like their initial goals. But it's definitely an incident that has caught the attention of the community, not only in London, but across Southwestern Ontario. And again, these two young workers, one from Tillsonburg, one with family in Langton as well. So it's just, it's sort of like not, and I guess just as well, the time, it's sort of like a comment, like just ahead of Christmas, when, a time that you expect to spend some time with your family and your loved ones, and to see something like this happen, it's definitely has struck a chord with many people, because as I say, like, no one expects that when anyone goes to work, sort of like not come back.
Yeah. Of course, that's the difficult part of this, because there are so many people that work in this very same industry. Want to ask you, just, so one of the things I like to do on the podcast is sort of peel back the curtain a little bit as far as how these stories come together and how it goes from, working on, hey, let's get some information here that we want to deliver to the public just so they know, to the pages of the London Free Press and lfpress.com. When you're trying to piece together, not necessarily what happened here, but the lives and the people who are impacted, and sadly the people who lost their lives, how does that work from a reporting perspective for you?
Well, once the initial coverage on Friday happened as to what had happened on the site, and the initial details that we had, city officials and police from the beginning were very clear that out of respect of the families, they said they would not be providing, any details about who had been injured or the people who had died in the incident. But that's sort of like the next logical question, I guess. The community wants to know a little bit about who has been impacted by this unfortunate event. And from the get-go on Saturday, as we planned sort of like our coverage, we knew that was going to be trying to find out a little bit more about who they were, put a face, and sort of like show. It's true that what they say that a figure, just a number, does not connect with people.
Yeah.
As having a face in a story, realizing the impact of any event. It's just through that human connection that readers really get it. And so we try to looking on social media, any sort of like the first step to try to find out any comments from people who may say, I know who this person was. We actually finding who the first of the workers was. We had received a tip that a company called Harder Concrete had been involved in some way. We didn't really know. That was sort of like all the information that we had. So I started doing some, research online. I came with 2 Harder Concrete companies. One I was actually in BC, one in Winnipeg. So clearly nothing to do with this. And then I just came across as well, just one that actually didn't have a website. It was just an address and a phone number that I found online. And, I decided to give a call, the number. And to my surprise, it was actually a paramedic who answered the phone. Basically, he told me that the phone had been found at an ambulance. They didn't know who the phone belonged to. It had been placed in the lost and found. And sort of like in that it was a strange interaction because I was expecting something different. In that exchange is how I pieced together that I was on the right track, that this perhaps was definitely someone who had been involved in this situation. I wasn't sure if it was one of the persons who had died or it had been one of the workers. We really had very little information at that point. But once I had that answer from the paramedic, my next step was to, drive to Langdon right away, which is the address that was listed online. And it was an hour away from London. When I got there, I immediately knew that I was at the right place because it was a house and there were like 8 or 9 vehicles parked outside. Obviously, family was gathering, and I think that's one of the hardest aspect of being a journalist, and perhaps having to do those calls when you're knocking on the door of someone when they're at one of their lowest point in their lives. It comes with the job. It never gets easier, I think. And when you're facing some of the circumstances in this specific case, it's all the much harder, I guess. A family member was very polite. He declined. He said the family was not ready to comment at the moment, but he did confirm that Henry Harder had been one of the 2 workers. By the time I arrived at the house, I had already found a name online, Henry Harder. And again, I wasn't sure of the involvement or anything like that, but he confirmed with me and gave me just very little information at the moment, but just enough for me to continue and sort of like narrow my search online. And that's how we came across sort of like the fundraising, the GoFundMe page, managed to contact a friend who had launched the fundraising effort, and sort of like trying to piece together some of the little information that I had. Noticing as well that as I was leaving the home, I noticed that Henry seemed to be his family member of a Mennonite community. And I had a friend who is also a member of the community. So I just put it to her, have you heard anything? Have you seen anything? Have you heard anything from your friends or anything like that? And she said, yes, actually, I've seen a number of posts about one of the workers, but it turned out that it was the other worker, not Henry Harder. So now I had the 2 names, an indication of who they were. And it was just a matter of reaching out to the family members, trying to get sort of like that confirmation from them, a little bit of information to try to put a face to this incident.
Yeah, and I get it, and I can sort of hear the emotion in your voice as you talk about it. And I know some people see those stories and think, oh, it's voyeuristic, but no, it's true. And I can say in my years of experience and your years of experience, what this is a bit more about. And just as we wrap up here, this is more about. It's all well and good to just say, okay, this is a name of someone who died, or these are the number of people who died. But you're right. These people deserve to be more than a number. They deserve to be more than a name, and I think that we try to provide that. And obviously, in a lot of cases, families want to help with that. So it's not easy. It's not a part of journalism that people enjoy, but at the same time, I think it's important for the community when a tragic incident like this happens to sort of to go through it that way.
Yeah, I've come to learn that at the end of the day, you are giving them the option to the family. It is up to them to decide, yeah, I want the community to know who my loved one was and what made him special. And some other families decide that they want to, it's a personal moment that they do not want to have that publicly, and that's totally fine. It's completely up to the family. All we can do is, reach out to them and say, we would like to, honor in some way the memory of the person who you have lost, and let them decide what they think or feel is best for their family.
Right. We'll leave it there just because we're right up against the clock here. Jonathan, the fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for giving us the very latest on what we know about the building collapse that happened last week here in London. And thank you for all of your work on this, which can be found on lfpress.com and London Free Press.
Thank you for having me.
That's Jonathan Juha, London Free Press reporter, joining us here on the London Free Press podcast, which, of course, you can subscribe to on Stitcher, on SoundCloud, on Spotify, rather, on Google Podcast, Apple Podcast. Find us on YouTube. Find us on lfpress.com as well. Many, many people doing that, and we're glad to see those numbers continue to tick up. So tell your friends and rate and subscribe as well if you don't mind taking a couple of minutes. We will be back with another episode later in the week. Thank you again for listening to this edition of the London Free Press podcast.